The two hatchlings sat in the corner of the yard and did not move. Every other young Drathiki in the training enclosure was running, snapping, breathing small jets of orange flame into the cold air of Vareth. The yard was loud with the crack of claws on stone and the short, sharp hiss that young dragons made when they wanted to look bigger than they were. It was a good yard, healthy, full of noise and fire and life. But in the far left corner, pressed close to the wall, two hatchlings simply sat. Their heads turned slowly, tracking every movement in the yard. Their dark eyes moved from one running hatchling to the next, then to the adult trainers, then to the high windows, then back again. They did not blink much. They did not make a sound. Rindavar had been watching them for 40 minutes through the thick observation glass. He had a data pad in his hand, but had not written anything on it for a long time. Behind him, the door clicked open. "You are standing in the wrong section." The voice was flat and precise. Sarath, lead researcher of the Drathiki Biological Institute, walked to the window beside him without looking at him. She was tall even for a Drathiki, her neck scales a deep gray-green, her eyes the color of cooling iron. "Observation Block 4 is the assigned station for your species. This is Block 1, for senior staff only." "The light is better here," Rin said. "That is not a reason. It helped me notice something." Sarath looked at the yard. She was quiet for a moment, scanning the enclosure with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "You are watching the Dovahkiel pair," she said. It was not a question. "Is that what they are called?" "It is a classification, not a name. We do not name the ones flagged for removal." She said it simply, the way someone states whether. "They are developmental failures, born in the same clutch, which is unusual enough. Both display the stillness condition. They do not engage, do not compete, do not respond to flame stimulus training. They are scheduled for exile in 30 cycles." Rin looked at the two hatchlings. Dova, the slightly smaller one, had tilted her head to watch a trainer cross the yard. Every small muscle in her face shifted in a way Rin could not quite name. Kale, beside her, was watching a group of 3 hatchlings play fighting near the center. His posture changed subtly as the fight got rougher. His shoulders drew up. His neck lowered. Matching, Rin thought. He is matching their tension without knowing it. "What is the stillness condition exactly?" Rin asked. "Failure to initiate, failure to compete, low flame output, no territorial behavior." Sarath turned from the window. "It is a known defect pattern. It appears in roughly 1 hatchling per 10,000. The biological cause is unclear. The outcome is always the same. They cannot survive in the wild, and they compromise the development of healthy clutchmates by occupying resources." "They are watching everything," Rin said. "Starring is not a survival skill." "I did not say starring, I said watching. There is a difference." Sarath looked at him for the first time with something other than indifference. It was not interest. It was the look a person gives a child who has said something that is technically not wrong but probably does not understand what it has said. "You have been on Vareth for 9 days," she said. "Your research clearance is observational. You are not permitted to interact with subjects, enter active enclosures, or submit findings that have not been reviewed by this office." "I understand." "Good." She moved toward the door. "Block 4 has a functional view of the training yard. Please use it." She left. Rin stayed at the window for another few minutes. Dova had not moved, but now she was watching the door through which Sarath had just exited, her head tilted at the same angle Sarath had been holding hers when she spoke. Small, precise, perfect. He finally wrote something on his data pad. Not mimicry, not random, intentional pattern mapping. Began within 90 seconds of subject entry, sustained focus. No distress signals. Query, is the stillness a failure to engage or a choice to observe? He walked back to Block 4. His colleague Bren Hale was there, eating something that smelled like it had been cooked 3 days ago and reheated twice. Bren was a medic and a practical man who believed in data he could measure and problems he could fix. He looked up when Rin came in. "You were in Block 1 again," Bren said. "Only for an hour. Sareth is going to have you removed from the post." "She is going to try." Rin sat down and looked at his notes. "There are 2 hatchlings scheduled for exile in 30 cycles. I want to understand why." Bren chewed slowly. "Because the Drathiki have been running this process for about 4,000 years and it works for them. It works for the hatchlings they keep. It does not work for the ones they throw away." "Rin, I am just observing. You have that look." "I do not have a look. You have the look you had on Ferris Station when you decided the injured sand crawlers were not aggressive but scared, and you spent 6 weeks proving it, and you were right, and it almost cost you your arm twice." Bren pointed at him with his fork. "That look." Rin did not answer. He looked at his notes again. In the far corner of the training yard, a young hatchling had fallen during a run and started making a low distress sound. Every adult in the yard moved toward the noise. Except Dova and Kale. They had already turned to face the fallen hatchling before the sound began. Rin added one more line to his pad. "Anticipatory response, pre-stimulus, how?" On the 8th night after Rin first stood in Block 1, a water pipe in the lower maintenance corridor burst and flooded the access tunnel between the eastern observation decks and the main research building. Maintenance crews worked through the dark to fix it. The corridor was sealed and rerouted. For 6 hours, the lower observation deck that ran along the ground level of the hatchling enclosure was unsupervised, unlocked, and forgotten. Rin found out about the flooding by accident. He found out about the unlocked door on purpose. He did not go inside the enclosure. He was careful about that. He stood at the low wire partition that separated the outer walkway from the yard itself, close enough that the cold air coming off the stone carried the faint sulfur smell of young dragon breath. He had food scraps from the research kitchen in a cloth wrap, not against the rules, technically. The yard was dark except for the ambient glow of Varith, 2 small moons through the high windows. Most of the hatchlings were in the sleeping burrows cut into the far wall. The yard was quiet. He waited. After about 10 minutes, 2 shapes separated from the shadows near the burrow entrance and walked slowly across the yard toward him. Not running, not cautious, just walking the way someone walks when they are not afraid and not in a hurry. Dova reached the wire partition first. She stood about a meter away and looked at him. Her head tilted left, then right. Her nostrils opened. She made no sound. Kale stopped a step behind her, watching Rin's hands. Rin crouched down so he was at their level. He set the cloth wrap on the ground and opened it slowly, keeping his movements visible. He did not reach through the wire. He simply let the smell of the food carry. Dova stepped closer. Her eyes did not go to the food. They stayed on his face. Rin noticed his own expression and realized he had been smiling slightly without knowing it. He watched Dova's face in return. And then something happened that he would write about 3 times before he felt like he was describing it accurately. Her face changed. Not dramatically, not the way a creature shows teeth or puffs up to seem dangerous. Something much smaller. The tension around her jaw released. The ridge scales above her eyes, which had been raised slightly in the alert position, lay flat. Her head stopped tilting. She just looked at him, still, settled. She was mirroring his calm. Not copying a posture, not mimicking an expression. She had read something in him, some state he had not consciously shown, and she had matched it. And then, because she had matched it, she had produced it. She was calm because he was calm, and now the calm was coming from both of them back and forth, getting quieter and deeper with each pass. Rin stayed very still. He thought, this is not a defect. Kale came forward then. He nosed the cloth wrap briefly, then sat beside Dova. He looked at the far side of the yard where the other burrows were. A low, restless sound was coming from one of them, Some hatchling having a bad sleep, probably. Kale's head turned toward the sound. His posture shifted, not aggressive, just attentive. Then he made a sound so quiet Rin almost missed it. A low hum, barely above silence. The restless sound from the burrow slowed, then stopped. Rin wrote nothing down. He did not reach for his pad, he just watched. He stayed for 2 more hours. The next day, he started his formal research log under a new heading. He titled it Empathic Resonance Behaviors in Drathiki Hatchlings Preliminary Notes. He listed every observation from the past 9 days in careful order. He added the events of the previous night. He included timestamps and behavioral metrics and cross-references to known Drathiki developmental literature. Then he walked to Sareth's office and requested a formal research extension on grounds of undocumented behavioral phenomena. Sareth read the first 3 lines of his request, then she set it down. "No," she said. "I have direct observational evidence that. Your evidence is informal and uncertified. You are not a Drathiki biologist. You are not a developmental specialist. You are a xenobiologist on a cross-cultural research exchange, and your permitted scope is observational documentation of normal Drathiki daily activity." She slid the request back across the desk. "What you are describing is not normal activity. That makes it outside your scope." "Does it not make it more important?" "It makes it a matter for this office, not for a visiting human." She did not say the word with cruelty. "Just wait. I will note your report in the general log. If it merits review, the review board will schedule it. The exile order is in 22 cycles." "Yes." Rin picked up his request form. He looked at it for a moment. Then he said, "Have you ever stood in the yard with them, close to the wire at night?" Sareth's eyes stayed on her desk. "That is not a standard research method." "No," Rin agreed, "it is not." He submitted the request to the Galactic Council Joint Committee that afternoon instead. It came back marked non-priority within 6 hours. Bren read the rejection notice and said nothing for a while. Then, "You are not going to stop." "No." "What do you need?" Rin looked at his notes. "I need someone to help me count how often aggression events occur when those 2 hatchlings are in the yard versus when they are in the burrows. I need 2 weeks of data." Bren looked at the ceiling, then at his hands. Then he said, "Fine." 2 weeks of data became 12 days, because Bren was thorough even when he did not believe in what he was doing. He sat with Rin in Block 4 for hours at a stretch, calling out timestamps when a hatchling bit another hatchling, when a trainer had to intervene, when a young Drathiki started flame cycling out of distress rather than practice. He cross-referenced the logs with the daily schedule that showed when Dova and Kale were in the main yard versus kept in the secondary burrow pen on the days the trainers wanted the other hatchlings to run open drills. On the 3rd day, Bren stopped arguing and started paying attention. On the 7th day, he said, "That is not a coincidence." Rin said, "No." The numbers were not subtle. When Dova and Kale were in the main yard, bite incidents dropped by 61%. Trainer interventions dropped by half. 2 hatchlings who had been flagged for chronic stress behavior, identified by compulsive scale scratching and refusal to eat, showed normal feeding patterns on the days the pair was present. On the days the pair was locked in the secondary pen, the stress behaviors returned. None of the trainers had noticed. They had not been looking for it. They had been looking at individual hatchlings, not at the yard as a whole. Rin and Bren had been looking at the yard as a whole. "They are doing something," Bren said. "They are regulating the group. Not deliberately, I do not think it is conscious strategy. I think they cannot help it. They read emotional states the way we read words, and they reflect calm back into a space the way a surface reflects light. They cannot turn it off." Rin pulled up the aggregated log on his pad. "In human terms, we would call them empaths. In very old, informal human terms, we would call them peacekeepers. In Drathiki terms, they are defects." "Yes." Bren was quiet. Outside the observation window, the training yard was midway through an afternoon drill session. Dova and Kale were in their usual corner, sitting still, watching. 3 other hatchlings had drifted close to them in the past hour, apparently without purpose, and were now napping in a loose cluster at the edge of the main activity. It looked accidental. It was not accidental. "You need to present this formally," Bren said. "You cannot just have notes. You need a full submission." "I submitted a request. It was rejected." "That was a preliminary request. You need to go over the committee. Go directly to the Council's Scientific Liaison Office. You have enough data now." "I tried that channel on day 4, non-priority." Bren exhaled slowly. "Then you need Sarath." Sarath already said no. Sarath said no to a 9-day hunch. Show her 12 days of quantified data and see what she says. He stood up, stretching. "She is a scientist. Scientists change their minds when the numbers change." Rin built the formal presentation over 2 sleepless nights. He mapped every data point, added behavioral context, cross-referenced known xenobiological literature on empathic sensitivity in non-human species, and wrote it in clean, Drathic-y scientific format so Sarath could not dismiss it on structural grounds. On the second night, somewhere after the 3rd hour, Bren came into the lab with 2 drinks and a strange expression. "Play that recording again," he said. "The one from the lower deck on day 9. Rin pulled it up. The audio from the night session, Kale making the low hum that had quieted the restless hatchling in the burrow. Bren listened. His face did not change, but his color did, and Bren was not someone whose color changed easily. "What is it?" Rin asked. "That sound," Bren set his drink down carefully. "I know that sound. It is a low-frequency harmonic. I could not find an exact match in the juvenile vocalization index." "It is not in the juvenile index." Bren looked at the audio waveform on the screen. "I heard it during my first month on Vareth. One of the senior administrative keepers was dying, old age. I sat with the attending medic for part of the night because she needed a second pair of hands. The adult Drathiki in the surrounding quarters made that sound from sundown until he passed." He paused. "It is a mourning sound, an adult grief call. The Drathiki use it when someone is dying, and they want the dying person to know they are not alone." The lab was very quiet. "Kale produced a grief call," Rin said slowly, "to calm a hatchling who was having a bad dream." "Yes." "He used a sound associated with comfort in the face of loss, to soothe distress, in a hatchling, in the dark." He could not have seen the hatchling. The burrow entrance faces the other way. "He felt it," Rin said. "He felt the distress through the wall, and he used the most powerful comfort sound his species has to answer it." Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Bren picked up his drink and said, "How much of this presentation is finished?" "About 70%. "Finish it, I will sit here." Rin worked until the first light of Vareth's dawn came through the narrow lab window. He added the audio analysis as a final section. He labeled it simply, "Subject produces adult grief comfort vocalization in response to unseen hatchling distress. Pre-stimulus, spontaneous, unprompted." He sent the full report to Sarath at first light. 16 cycles remained before the exile order. He did not sleep, he waited. At midday, his message terminal made a single soft sound. Sarath had replied. 2 words come in. Sarath's office had no windows. Rin had always found that interesting for a scientist who spent her career studying living things. The walls held data screens and specimen cases, and 30 years of research files stacked in physical form, because Sarath did not fully trust digital archives. There was one chair on the visitor's side of her desk. Rin sat in it. She had his report open on her desk screen. She did not look up when he entered. She made him wait for 4 minutes while she finished reading. He did not mind. He had slept for 3 hours on the lab floor and was running on poor nutrition and the particular energy that comes from knowing you are right about something important. Finally, she looked up. "The audio analysis," she said. "Yes. You are certain about the identification?" Bren identified it independently, without prior context. He has medical experience with Drathiki adult passing rights. He recognized it immediately. Soreth folded her hands on the desk. For a Drathiki, that gesture meant something different than it did for a human. It was not relaxed. It was the physical posture of controlled internal processing. She was thinking very hard and making herself hold still while she did it. "I cannot reschedule the exile order," she said. "That authority belongs to High Warden Thas. He arrives on Vareth in 4 cycles to confirm the removal in person, which is traditional for any exile of unusual classification. Can you request a delay?" "I can request a review. It will be logged and passed to his office." She looked at the screen again. "I will do that. What I cannot promise you is that he will change the order." "What would change his mind?" "Evidence he can see with his own eyes." She said it simply. "Thas is not a scientist. He is a tradition keeper. Data on a screen means very little to him. He will want to observe a direct demonstration of what you are claiming." Rin thought about that. How likely is a spontaneous demonstration in 4 cycles? In normal yard conditions, not likely. What you are describing requires an emotionally elevated situation. The hatchlings respond to stress and distress. Without those conditions present, their behavior looks exactly like the stillness defect it has always been diagnosed as. She paused. "You cannot manufacture a crisis." "No," Rin agreed. "I would not do that." He went back to Block 4 and sat with Bren and waited. On the 3rd cycle after his meeting with Soreth, High Warden Thas arrived. He was older than Rin expected. Very large, even for a Drathiki, with neck scales that had faded from deep color to a pale, worn gray. He moved through the research post with the unhurried certainty of someone who had decided what things meant long before he arrived to look at them. He was polite to Rin in the automatic way of someone who has learned to be polite to humans because the council requires it, and for no other reason. He toured the facility. He reviewed the exile documentation. He scheduled the formal removal for the following morning. Then that afternoon, the adult yard exploded. It started over food allocation. 2 of the largest adult Drathiki, both senior males, had been in low-level territorial dispute for several weeks. The trainers knew about it and had been managing feeding schedules to keep them separated. On that afternoon, a scheduling error put them in the same feeding yard at the same time. By the time the alarm triggered, both adults were at full threat display. Neck frills extended, flame building in their chest cavities, the deep orange glow visible through the scale gaps along their ribs. 3 trainers were trying to approach from the sides. None of them could get close. The heat coming off the 2 adults had already raised the ambient temperature of the yard by several degrees. Rin was in Block 4. He heard the alarm and ran. He passed the hatchling enclosure on his way to the adult yard. Through the wire, he could see Dova and Kale standing at the partition. They were facing the adult yard, not the alarm lights, not the trainers running past. The adult yard. They had oriented toward the source of the distress before Rin had even registered where the alarm was coming from. He stopped. He should have kept running, he knew that. But he stopped and he thought about what Soreth had said. You cannot manufacture a crisis. And he looked at Dova and Kale pressed against the wire, reading something from 50 meters away through 2 walls, and he thought, I cannot manufacture one, but one is already here. He opened the gate between the hatchling enclosure and the outer corridor. He did not open the adult yard gate. He left it up to them. Dova walked out first, then Kale. They did not run. They walked with their usual calm, deliberate pace through the outer corridor to the adult yard gate, which was held open by a trainer who had stepped back to avoid the heat. They walked in. Every human in the facility who was watching said later that the silence happened before anything visible changed. It was not that the adults stopped displaying and then it got quiet. It was that a silence came into the yard first, and then the adults began to slow. Dova walked to the exact midpoint between the two males and sat down. Kale sat beside her. They did not look at either adult directly. They looked slightly down and to the side, which in Drathiki body language is a signal of non-competition. Then they went still. The deep orange glow in the adult's ribs began to fade. It took about 90 seconds. Then one adult turned his head away. Then the other. The neck frills lowered slowly, like sails losing wind. The temperature in the yard dropped. A trainer let out a breath so loud it was almost a word. Rin looked across the yard. Thas was standing at the observation rail. His hands were at his sides. His expression was the expression of a very old person who has just been asked to reconsider something they stopped questioning 40 years ago. He stood there for a long time without speaking. Rin was called to Sareth's office the next morning. He had not slept. He did not care. He walked in and sat in the chair and waited. Sareth was already standing. "Thas wants to speak with you," she said. "Formally, tomorrow. He is requesting a full presentation of your findings." Rin said, "And the exile order." Sareth looked at him for a moment. Paused, she said. The hearing room was built for Drathiki. The ceiling was high enough that an adult could stand at full height without folding their neck. The stone table was 3 meters long and cut from a single piece of dark Varith granite. Rin sat on one side of it. Across from him sat Sareth, High Warden Thas, and 4 scholars from the Drathiki Biological Institute, whose names Rin had memorized the night before because he knew that knowing names mattered. He had his data pad. He also had a secondary screen Bren had set up on the table, running the compiled behavioral footage from the past 12 days alongside the adult yard incident from the previous afternoon. He did not start with the footage. He started with numbers. He presented the aggression reduction data first. Clean, simple, no interpretation. Just incident counts, timestamps, and the correlation to Dova and Kale's yard presence. He let the numbers sit on the screen without commentary until someone asked a question. One of the scholars, an older female with pale gold scales, asked whether the reduction could be explained by the pair simply occupying space that would otherwise be contested. A proximity effect rather than an active influence. Rin had prepared for this. He pulled up a secondary analysis showing that the reduction occurred even when Dova and Kale were in the far corner of the yard, separated from the active group by the full width of the enclosure. Distance did not weaken the effect. In some sessions, it was stronger at distance than at proximity. The scholar wrote something down. He moved to the audio data. He played the grief call recording twice. He gave the clinical description of what Kale had produced and why it could not have been learned behavior. No adult Drathiki had performed a grief call within acoustic range of the hatchling enclosure in the preceding 6 months. Kale had generated a sound he had never heard, a sound tied to the deepest emotional event in Drathiki culture. Thas had not spoken yet. He sat very still. His eyes were on the screen, but Rin had the feeling he was not looking at the footage. He was looking at something further back. Rin moved to his central argument. In human biology, we have documented cases of high-sensitivity empathic individuals for centuries. We have studied them as anomalies, as gifts, as problems, depending on the era and the culture asking the question. He kept his voice even. What those individuals share across every study is a neural configuration that processes the emotional state of others as primary data, not secondary, not peripheral, primary. They do not decide to feel what someone nearby is feeling. They feel it first, before the decision is available. He looked at the scholars. What Dova and Kale are doing is not a defect in Drathiki development. It is an advanced configuration of the same sensory system that all Drathiki use for environmental threat assessment. In them, it has extended into the social and emotional range. They are not failing to be normal Drathiki. They are being a version of Drathiki that your developmental literature does not have a category for. Yet, one of the younger scholars, a male with rust-red scales, leaned forward. You are suggesting an evolutionary branch. I am suggesting a naturally occurring variation. Whether it represents a branch or a latent trait that surfaces rarely is a question your biology team would need to answer. I am not a Drathiki specialist. I only know what I observed. Then your recommendation, Thas asked. His voice was much quieter than Rin expected from a warden. Do not exile them, study them, use them. The adult yard incident is not an isolated example of what they can do. It is a preview. The rust-red scholar shook his head. There is no precedent in our developmental records for reclassifying a flagged hatchling pair. The exile process exists for sound biological reasons. You are asking us to break 4,000 years of established practice based on 12 days of data from a visiting human. I am asking you to look at what is already in your records, Rin said. Sarath spoke. It was the first time she had spoken in the hearing. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, something Rin recognized as the sound a person makes when they have been awake all night with a thought they cannot put down. I conducted a search of the historical archive last night, she said. Pre-unification era, early settlement records. She opened her own pad. There are 17 documented accounts across a span of approximately 800 years describing Drathiki hatchlings with the stillness trait. In 13 of those accounts, the hatchlings were exiled per standard procedure. In 4 accounts, they were not. She paused. In those 4 cases, the accounts use a specific term, verksal. It translates roughly as the stilled ones. The records describe them as being assigned to conflict mediation functions within their communities. 2 of the 4 accounts are from periods of extended territorial war. Both accounts note that the Verksal achieved outcomes that conventional negotiation had failed to produce. The hearing room was silent. The practice was discontinued when the warrior caste tradition became dominant, approximately 3,000 years ago, Sarath continued. The term was reclassified as a folk belief. The biological markers were reclassified as developmental defect. She set her pad down. I do not know why I did not find this before. I think I did not look for it because I was looking for a reason to confirm what I already believed. Thas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke to Rin. You are very persistent for someone with no authority here. I did not need authority, Rin said. I only needed the window and enough time. Thas looked at the screen where the footage of the adult yard was still running. The moment where Dova and Kale walked in. The silence that came before the anger left. The exile order remains paused, Thas said. I will not confirm it until I have reviewed the archive records personally. He stood, which ended the hearing. We will reconvene in 3 days. He walked out, the scholars followed. Soreth stayed behind. She looked at Rin for a moment, then she said, You should sleep. I will, he said, after. She almost said something else. He could see it. Then she gathered her pad and left. Rin sat alone in the large stone room for a while, in the silence, with the footage still running on the small screen. 3 days. 3 days passed the way important days sometimes do too slowly, and then all at once. Rin spent the first day writing nothing. He walked the outer perimeter of the research post, which was something he had not done since his first week on Vareth. The planet was cold and dry with a sky that turned a particular shade of dark amber in the late afternoon when the dust from the western flats caught the light. He had been too busy to notice it before. He noticed it now. The second day he spent in Block 4, watching the yard. Dova and Kale were in their usual corner. 3 hatchlings who had started gravitating toward them over the past week were there again, sitting close without apparent reason, calm the way things are calm when there is a still center nearby. Bren sat with Rin for a while and then left without saying much. There was not much that needed saying. On the morning of the third day, Rin was called to Sarath's office. Thas was already there. He was standing at the far wall, looking at a large physical map of the Drathiki settlement territories, the old kind drawn on pressed material in the style of 4 centuries past. It showed everything: the old clan boundaries, the contested zones, the places that no longer existed because the wars that had burned through them had been thorough. There were a lot of those. Rin sat in the single visitor's chair. Sarath stood by her desk. Thas kept his back to the room for a moment. Then he turned. He looked older than he had at the hearing. Rin was not sure if it was the light or something else. "I reviewed the archive personally," Thas said. "As I said I would. I read all 4 accounts of the Verksal." He was quiet for a moment. "I also reviewed the exile records from my own tenure as warden, 41 years. In that time, 11 hatchlings were flagged and removed under the stillness classification." Rin said nothing. "I accepted each order as standard procedure. I signed each confirmation personally." Thas looked at the map on the wall. "I had a clutchmate who was flagged when we were very young. I was told he was defective. I was told it was a biological fact and not a matter for grief. I accepted that too." The office was very quiet. "I do not know if he was a Verksal," Thas said. "I have no way to know now. The records are only classification logs. They do not describe behavior in detail. They describe outcome." He turned back to face the room. "The outcome is always listed as removal, nothing after." Rin held the silence. He had learned that silence after a thing like that was the only correct response. Filling it would be wrong. After a moment, Thas sat down in the other chair that had been brought in. He looked tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. "The exile order is rescinded," he said. "Dova and Kale will remain in the research post under a new classification. Sarath has agreed to lead a formal study." He looked at Rin. "You will be invited to participate as a co-researcher if you choose to remain on Varath." "I choose to remain," Rin said immediately. "The study will take time. There will be resistance from the traditional faculty and from several warden offices who will see this as a challenge to established doctrine." He said it without drama. "You should be aware of that." "I am aware." Thas nodded. He stood, and the motion of it was the motion of a very large creature carrying something heavy. He looked at Rin for a long moment. "Your species sees things we have learned not to look at," he said. "I do not know if that is a quality or simply a consequence of being new here and not yet knowing what you are supposed to ignore." Rin considered the question genuinely. "Maybe both," he said. Thas made a sound that Rin's translation piece classified as a low acknowledgement. Then he left. Sarath waited until his footsteps were gone. Then she said, "The formal reclassification paperwork requires a species designation for the trait. I intend to name the classification Verksal, restored from the historical record." She looked at her desk rather than at Rin. "I want to note in the record that the identification was made by a human researcher on observational exchange. The record will be accurate." "Thank you," Rin said. "Do not thank me. I dismissed your first request with 7 cycles to spare. I should have looked sooner." She picked up her pad. "Go see them. You have earned that." He walked to the lower observation deck. The afternoon light was coming through the high windows at the angle that turned the stone floor a warm, dull gold. The hatchling yard was in its late session, most of the young Drathiki winding down toward the evening rest. Dova and Kale were in the corner. They were always in the corner. But today there were 5 other hatchlings sitting near them, arranged in a loose half-circle without any apparent intention, the way water settles into low places without being directed. The 5 young Drathiki were calm and quiet, and some of them had their eyes closed. Dova was watching the far wall. Kale was watching the window. Rin crouched at the partition glass, and looked at them for a long time. He pulled out his data pad. Not for notes. He just held it, the way a person holds something familiar when they are feeling something large and do not need to write it down. He thought about his research log entry from the first day. Anticipatory response, pre-stimulus, how? He did not have a complete answer yet. He suspected he would spend a long time finding one. He found he did not mind that. That evening he wrote a single entry in his personal log, not the research log, his own. He wrote, "Humans are small and we are new here and most of the galaxy has already decided what we are worth. But we grew up on a hard planet that gave us almost nothing, and we learned to watch carefully and wait and not look away from things just because they were inconvenient. That is what we brought with us when we came out here. I do not know if it is enough, but today it was. Today it was exactly enough." He closed the pad. In the yard, Kale began to hum, low and quiet, barely above nothing. Dova joined him after a moment, a half-step lower, so the two sounds wove together into something that was not quite a melody but was not quite not one either. 5 sleeping hatchlings did not stir. The amber light faded out of the windows. Varith's 2 small moons came up.